Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, March 18th, 2019. According to the clock, I still have to click on because I never did get around to fixing that damn thing. Good morning. It is time for another show, the day after St. Patrick's Day. How was your St. Patrick's Day? I see I didn't have any green on. I just realized that. I probably realized that last night. Didn't make any difference. Nobody pinched me. Does anybody still do that? I hope not. I think in the current climate, that would be misinterpreted very badly. So I don't recommend anybody do that outside of immediate family, and maybe in certain circumstances, not even then. So, I don't know. Did you have a good St. Patrick's Day anyway? Does it make a difference in your daily life? There was an awful lot of green being worn by people I suspect were not Irish. But it's okay. Everyone gets to sort of do the honorary Irish thing. One clever thing I did see, somebody on Twitter, I guess, got a hold of the footage of, is it Chicago? It's Chicago, right, from The Fugitive, where they dye the river green, which is weird, and I hope that they've improved the sorts of chemicals that they use to do that, although it may or may not make any difference in that part of the river. I don't know. But they dyed the river green, as usual, and, pardon me, some clever soul, who is also on Twitter, whether or not that adds to the cleverness, I'm not sure, noticed that, hey, that's actually pretty close to, or at least usable as, the color of green that they use for those green screens. I don't know what the technical terminology is, but they did, because they used it correctly, and so they projected all sorts of fun things onto the river for those of us watching at home. Live, of course, it just looked like green mess, but anyway, I guess that's how they enjoy spending the St. Patrick's Day holiday that way. They're in Chicago, and they have, their own pizza, and that's how that city's working. So, anything else new? Yes, over the weekend, lots developed. There are an awful lot of stories that need attention today. I don't know how many of them we're going to be able to get to. Greg does a really good job at rounding things up and running through them lightning round style, so we'll see how much we can recap with his help, but there's a little bit of everything in here. Of course, it was a weekend spent on recovery, to the extent you can recover from shootings like we witnessed in Christchurch over the end of the last week and then over the weekend. We were, all, of course, all reminded by the Prime Minister of New Zealand how an adult, normal person is supposed to act in a leadership role. We didn't have any of that. I don't think they let Trump out to golf this weekend, so he melted down on Saturday and went crazy, screaming at people on Twitter all the way into Sunday morning. And then he went to church, which, maybe that was what was really bothering him during he knew he had to go the next day. Who knows? I guess he doesn't like it very much. And he was yelling at everybody, including John McCain, who's dead, and, it was kind of unseemly all around. But, again, lots to catch up on, and many things that, lots of Trump stories developing over the weekend. Lots of domestic Trump stories, international Trump stories. There's happenings in Saudi Arabia. I understand the Daily Beast carrying a story this morning, or at least I saw it this morning, claiming that MBS has been stripped of some of his powers, but probably not enough of them. And if he hasn't been stripped of his bone saws, then maybe the rest of it doesn't make any real difference. New developments in the already ancient raid of Trump's fundraisers' offices from a few months ago, as I recall, but now some new linkages to familiar figures in the Trump/Trump-Russia circles, and also new developments in the Boeing controversy. I'm pretty sure that Greg has got information on all of those, so we'll check in with him and catch up on that stuff. And then just good general Trump reporting and, general collapse of the United States government, both domestically and in the international standings around the world. And let's see. Lots more to catch up on. Here's sort of the personal news development. You know, I like to do that first thing in the morning. Many of you may have seen me tweet this thing out, and if not, perhaps I will share it with you in our roundup post later today. Where did I stick this thing? I guess I'll have to scroll back a little bit. I was brought to my attention yesterday that my son's textbook for the class's AP Comparative Government. I don't know what they were comparing, what governments they were comparing in this thing, because this was all about the United States government. They seem to spend a lot of time. I mean, we have to compare something to the rest of the world. It needs to have something to compare to, but they spend an awful lot of time on American government. We're very ethnocentric that way here in the United States. We're isolated. Anyway, his CompGov, as he calls it, textbook had a page in it that, I guess in discussing the power or the role of the media in American politics, just illustrated the lower half of this page with a photo captioned, "Blogs, both conservative and liberal, have become an important form of political communication." And I can't argue with that. I can argue with the pictures that he included in the book, but, they were looking for balance here. They went with Powerline up at the top, since they said both conservative and liberal, and I guess that's the order you're supposed to read it in. And Daily Kos, though, is the inclusion for liberal blogs. Makes a certain amount of sense, really, for both of them. The book, I think, is printed in 2012, so it kind of stops short. That's okay. I mean, it's strange enough that Daily Kos is in a history book, I guess, essentially. Though I guess it's contemporary history, obviously. But it was pretty interesting. And the screenshot they took was from, for some reason, April 23rd, 2007. So this is probably the 2012 edition of this book, but I guess it got published in 2007, 2008. So that's the screen grabs that they used, April 23rd, 2007, for both of them. There was a pretty good chance at April 23rd, 2007 that whatever was on the front page might have been under my authorship, but they didn't actually capture one with mine. That would have been something. And my son was saying, I'm not certain that would have been. I thought, wouldn't that be so cool if that was it? And he was pretty sure that it would not. So I wonder what would have happened. I guess, kids. Right, they would have seen it in there, and they would have said, "Ha, Waldman, is that you? Is that you? Is that your dad? Is that your brother? Whatever. It is my dad." And they would have thought that was hilarious and somehow humiliating. Maybe not in an AP class. You could hope for that. Anyway, so that rendered, my life's work real for my son. He knows. They both know that Daily Kos exists. That's it. It's the dumb place where Dad writes stuff and everybody pretends knows what he's talking about. Yeah, that's kind of the best description of it. I couldn't really describe Powerline to him, though, so I was just as glad to avoid that. However, I did notice, by the way, he had also, I guess he's studying for a test. I hope it's not too late to change this, but you'll probably remember this too, Greg. He's got in addition to his textbook, he had a photocopied excerpt from, I think, another different textbook, I guess. Let me see if I can find the title on this one. All right, well, anyway, for AP U.S. Government and Politics was the textbook he was reading out of. And on page 196, if you have this textbook somewhere, begins a key concept, as they put it, key concept 5D, the media as linkage. And there's a little blurb here set off in a box that says contemporary connection. The term fake news, it says, was coined by President Trump in his campaign speeches and repeated often after he fired FBI Director James Comey in 2017 and a special prosecutor was appointed. Much of the reporting by the mainstream media regarding possible Trump campaign collusion with Russia during the 2016 campaign was described as fake news by Trump on Twitter and in speeches he gave. So I have appended 2 sticky notes to this thing here with an arrow pointing at it. It says, "Not true. Fake news was first used. You'll all remember this. I think you'll back me up on it. Let me know, or if I'm wrong, I'll take the stickers off, throw them away, and pretend I never did it. Fake news, as I recall, was first used to describe, accurately, by the way, that weird network of fly-by-night websites that often were operated by foreign scammers that literally made up sensational, and I'll put it in scare quotes, news stories packaged to look real, and used them as clickbait to rack up Google ad money and Facebook money. Their pro-Trump news was wildly viral among idiots who love to share stuff that was confirmed all their biases, and made a lot of money for the scammers, but was almost universally literally fake. And Trump later copied the term and co-opted it and used it as his own to describe what was really actual network news and print journalism that he found unfavorable. That today's textbooks now credit him with coining the term demonstrates the effectiveness of his lies. Very disappointing. That's my note for the textbook authors there. I hope you're listening and you're ashamed of yourselves. And I'm right. I hope that last part is especially true. Good morning, Greg. I'm ready to speak with you now. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, good.
I sent over a picture that I had. I just took two of my favorite textbooks that I use when looking at media bias.
Okay.
And one is the 10th edition now of W. Lance Bennett's News, The Politics of Illusion. Very, very good. And then also a more recent entree into the genre, Adam Schiffer, Evaluating Media Bias. So there are some pretty good textbooks out there. Frankly, I read them a while ago, and I don't remember whether Daily Kos is in them.
I don't know.
But, it's when I was listening to you describe comparative government, my first thought is, okay, let's compare the government now to what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, that's a good idea. People might forget, and that's why we want to limit the length of the Trump term as much as possible.
Right. Well, that's why the Prime Minister of New Zealand is there, and that's why Angela Merkel has been there on the world stage to remind us of what leaders actually are supposed to do, as opposed to what they do. And speaking of lightning rounds, I want to mention something that Joe Bruno, who covers North Carolina 9 for us, remember that's still an open seat, and they will be having primaries and then a general election. But Joe Bruno reminded us that in the absence of an actual representative from North Carolina 9, constituent duties will be taken up by the clerk of the House.
Yes, right.
So if anybody ever wanted to know, what does the clerk of the House do in between controversies? Well, that's one thing.
Yes. I mean, they actually do plenty. But, yeah, that's right. When there is the clerk of the House is I don't know if they're mentioned by that title, but it's a constitutional officer, essentially, and that's the person when the House renews itself and everybody has to be sworn in again, and you go, well, who administers the oath to the person who administers the oath to everybody else? The answer is the clerk. They're the fallback for just about everything.
Right, otherwise known as Bunter. That was Lord Peter Wimsey's manservant in the Dorothy Sayers classic series, who basically could do anything and everything quietly and efficiently and just got it done.
Unlike Cato, he was a noisy guy.
Unlike Cato. So Bunter it is.
Okay.
Anyway, so there's that. Again, I didn't want to forget that. And yes, you mentioned a new retelling of something that happened last summer with names named now. ProPublica published this morning. Federal authorities raided Trump fundraiser's office in money laundering probe. Now, this isn't new. This happened over the summer.
Right.
But it says a sealed search warrant obtained by ProPublica shows federal agents scoured Elliot Broidy's office for documents related to China, Saudi Arabia, and a Miami Beach Club promoter.
Yeah, yes.
Right? So agents were authorized to use the mega donor's hands and face to unlock any phones that required fingerprint or facial scans.
Right. Yes.
This was reported back in August that the Washington Post reported that the Justice Department was investigating him. Yeah. But they got a hold of a sealed warrant, and they offered new details of federal authorities' investigation of allegations that Brody had attempted to cash in on his Trump White House connections and dealings with foreign officials. It also shows the government took a more aggressive approach with the Trump ally than was previously known, entering his office and removing records just like it did with Michael Cohen.
Yeah.
Now, I think Cohen had said something along the lines of, there's another story I can't really talk about. Maybe it's this one.
Yes, there's a lot that could still be unraveled here, and I don't know how they got a hold of this.
I don't know. I just work here. This is what it says. The search warrant cites 3 potential crimes that authorities are investigating: conspiracy, money laundering, and violations of the law barring covert lobbying on behalf of foreign officials. The only one that's missing is obstruction of justice, but that's for Mueller to do.
Yes. All right. Well, this was a good update and an interesting little bit there that to use the fingerprints and facial recognition to unlock people's phones. That's,
the other side of the coin is that people have been talking about, in broad strokes, those with expertise, unlike myself, for example, what is the Mueller report likely to say? What is it not likely to say? When you do these reports, how does it work? What are the constraints based on the language, given that Mueller is a stickler for following the rules and so on and so forth? But if you had any doubt about some of the things he was looking at, he was looking at a wide range of things. He was only going to confine himself to this really narrow thing. Well, actually, according to this, it was pretty wide. Yeah,
well, it would have to be. And, he's a pretty good lawyer, as it turns out. So most good lawyers can turn even a narrow subject into a broader one. But he was to task him with looking into interference in the election and Russian involvement in things. The whole reason and the whole entry of Russia into anything was because they were broad-based and inserted their tentacles everywhere. And that's how they didn't just approach Donald Trump and say, would you like some help with the Electoral College? It wasn't like that. It was right. It's everywhere.
Let's have a meeting in Putin's office over borscht, and we'll talk about lots of things. But again, this emphasizes it wasn't just the Russians; it was also the Middle Eastern powers that were very much interested in manipulating this administration.
True. Once they found out that you could do it, and they may have known before the Russians. And a lot of discussion of China this weekend, too. A lot of reminders that there's been a lot of theorizing from the very beginning that the real issue would turn out to be China. Hasn't developed as such yet, but constant hints that it might break open.
Right. So we'll see. Anyway, while that's going on, of course, we're watching the response that Trump had to the violence in New Zealand, which, I have to say always feels closer to home than you'd think, given that it was a world away. We can certainly relate to that here in Connecticut.
Yeah.
And the New Zealand Prime Minister was stellar, exemplary. And as David Leonhardt points out in the New York Times this morning in an op-ed, it isn't complicated. Trump encourages violence.
Yeah.
He doesn't deserve blame for any specific attack. He does deserve blame for the increase in white nationalist violence, which, by the way, we are seeing, whether it's Tree of Life in Pittsburgh or whether it's Charlottesville. A wink and a nod. Remember the Pepes that were trying to get him elected. Or as Andrew Gillum said in Florida about his opponent, but certainly applies to Trump. I'm not saying he's racist, but the racists think he's racist.
That's true. They all seem to,
and it is true. They all seem to think that, and that's just like really, really weird.
They seem to write it in the papers they leave behind that are intended to be discovered to explain their violence should they be killed in the middle of it.
Saying things like, the left plays a tougher game. It's very funny. I actually think the people on the right are tougher, but they don't play it tougher. Okay, I can tell you, I have the support of the police, the support of the military, the support of the bikers for Trump. I have the tough people, but they don't play it tough until they get to a certain point, and then it would be bad, very bad. Why would you say that?
Because
why would you think it, and why would you say it?
I don't know. You would you'd have to be dumb to say it. You would think it because you also, likewise a simpleton. You think that's A, the essence of power, and B, you've seen on TV that that's what tough guys do. They threaten other people.
Right.
Okay.
So whenever you talk about this, then folks on the right will say, oh, but what about that Steve Scalise shooting with attempted mass murder of House Republicans on a baseball field? And that was pretty horrible. But it's not like those events happen all the time, whereas people on the right shooting up people on the left happens all the time.
Yeah. By the way, also noted for the record, saw somebody's tweet go by over the weekend. See if I can dig it up. But a great side-by-sides of, first, on the one hand, all of the people giving not the white power sign, but it's just an OK symbol. It's just a weird collection of people who all happen to be alt-right, rising stars, giving the OK sign, as they say, inside the White House, for one thing. Side by side with, do you know what the New Zealand suspect did when they brought him in his bulletproof vest and handcuffs into his arraignment? He's photographed giving the exact same hand sign, except upside down because his hands were cuffed.
Right.
But,
with,
just a joke, everybody.
Symbols that he displayed were very same symbols that were on the shields in Charlottesville.
Yes,
and, of course, he had a
weird
direct reference to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
As well as Candace Owen, who's
yes,
if you haven't heard of her, that's okay.
Yeah. I'm surprised that he has, actually, to be honest. But that just also goes to bolster another point made at the end of last week. I don't know whether it's intended to be dismissive in any way when we refer to these things when they happen here as domestic terrorism or people as white nationalists. It's a transnational, international movement. It's as international a form of terrorism as any other. And you shouldn't forget about it. And if that makes you think of it as more serious and dangerous, good.
And your code word for today is invasion. So if you see people talking about invasions of immigrants,
like the president,
that's part of the problem.
Yes, that too. He also, of course, made reference to invasion, which was, they've used that code for a long time. It was in this so-called manifesto. And the president dropped it day of in comments to the press. I think I misread it. I thought that it was being reported he actually used those. Maybe he was in a phone call with the Prime Minister of New Zealand. So, but it is an invasion. I think in rereading that, it just may have been comments to the press in general. But I don't put it past Trump to have
Jerry
done
Doyle
that.
from Reuters makes this point. Saying white supremacists have a point about immigration, but they're wrong to be violent about it doesn't make you nuanced. It makes you a white supremacist. Let's be clear about this.
Okay, good.
So, for instance, if you condemn the Christchurch shootings but call immigration an invasion, mirroring the words the mosque killer used, guess what? I have some bad news for you.
They may not think it's bad news, but it is. Yes, you're right.
Right. So just put all of that in context.
Thank you.
Now, there's a shooting this morning that is unclear in the Netherlands, in Utrecht. Multiple people wounded on a tram, and the police are considering the possibility of a terrorist motive, but too early to say.
Yeah.
So if it was on a tram or a subway or something like that, it could have been an argument over a seat, or it could have been worldwide terrorism. We don't know. And that's the world we live in 2019.
Yeah, not much in the way of shooting over seats in other countries where there's just not as many guns floating around, but I guess anything can happen.
Right. Well, of course, the other thing that comes out of New Zealand is they took about 24 to 36 hours to move on doing something about guns. And
they're slow.
Their cabinet has agreed in principle already what to do, and they'll unveil their proposals next week. We all recall that after Port Arthur, Australia got rid of a lot of their guns. So we'll see what happens in New Zealand. But I would guess something similar. It's a nation of 5 million people, quite diverse, simply because of its size. So any larger group is going to represent a certain percentage of diversity. Mm-hmm. So, good for them. I'm sorry it happened, but good for them for acting.
Yes. Early word was that they were considering banning all semi-automatic weapons, which is a very drastic response and not a bad one. And if they can pull it off, more power to them. You can have all the, regular
as my gut friends
point
out, virtually all guns are semi-automatic.
Yeah, right. That's true. Although there's plenty, look, if you want to get a revolver or a bolt-action rifle to do your hunting.
Or a blunderbuss, you can do that. Or do it with a bow and arrow.
Right. Sure. That's always available to you as an option. But, yeah, and it's a good reminder, and it's a solid one.
That's what my neighbors do. They hunt deer with bow and arrow in deer season.
Yeah. All right.
Yep.
Well, I do see a lot of that. People, even what's his name, the crazy guy from the NRA loves bow hunting. Ted Nugent.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, good.
Yeah, good for him. He can still go and do it. Yeah. But in case you were thinking it was too drastic. It's actually a great reminder that all semi-automatic weapons can do this. All semi-automatic weapons can bump fire and be mistaken very easily by onlookers for machine guns. And if you don't believe me, go to YouTube and type in bump fire Glock pistol or any pistol, Sig Sauer, whatever. The point is, off-the-shelf handguns can fire like machine guns with no modification and no additional equipment. We just don't talk about that.
Right. And again, in terms of lightning rounds, we won't talk about this a lot, but the Seattle Times and the New York Times has stories about Boeing and the suspect 737 MAX, about what's wrong with them. Is the engine in the right place? Does it have the wrong software? Did they tell the pilots about it? It sounds like it really got screwed up, and a lot of this was kept secret. So I think Boeing is going to be in a lot of under a lot of pressure over this, if not in a lot of trouble over what happens. So we'll see how that turns out.
And they'll rightly be able to point to government entities at fault here, too. It turns out that we've delegated a lot of the responsibility that used to belong to the FAA to the plane manufacturers. Everything's fine.
Here, some examples: understated the power of the new flight control system designed to swivel a horizontal tail to push the nose of the plane down to avert a stall. Failed to account for how the system could reset itself each time a pilot responded, thereby missing the potential impact of the system repeatedly pushing the airplane's nose down. Assessed the failure of the system as one level below catastrophic. Even that hazardous danger level should have precluded activation of the system based on input from a single sensor, and that's how it was designed. Now, some of the airlines, like United, according to some of the flight analysts I saw, speaking about this, said that they actually had two sensors involved, not one. So their system was different, which is why they weren't quick to take them out of the air. But in the end, everybody did.
Yeah. Well, there's an awful lot swirling around that one, not only how Boeing behaved, how the FAA behaved, but, of course, how Donald Trump behaved in the middle of it all, too. We're going to have to spread that out over a couple of days. It's going to be a long developing story, that one.
Right. With some facts coming in. After the break, we'll talk about the Democratic primary.
Yeah, okay. That sounds like a good topic. People might be interested. Very good. Thanks. It's a very professional segment. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on it. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just having an off-the-air discussion about how I should sell everything in the house to buy a bigger computer, basically. Still working on replacing the laptop that was once the backup, and now we want to buy something, one that works, and two that is capable of running the show should anything happen to the main computer. And it's all a question of, how many more things can we add to this and increase the cost, and is it going to be worth doing? And Greg, I think, had the right advice. Is a couple years into your purchase, you hit the wall and realize, I should have done it. I can't believe I passed on it. Why do I have so little memory? Why didn't I buy that upgraded processor? Whatever. True. It's good.
Anyway,
good all right.
One big story that happened over the weekend is that Judge Janine been pulled off of Fox.
I would never have known, but for the leader of the free world grousing about it.
One of his many Festivus tweets this weekend was that Tucker Carlson is defiantly on the air. Of course, he's a white guy.
Is he? When's his vacation start? I mean, he is
for
white,
for the White Power Hour. I don't think he ever's on vacation.
I thought he was supposedly taking a totally planned vacation, but okay.
This week, yeah, something like that.
All right.
Anyway, he was on the air, but Judge Jeanine was not. And the Washington Post has a nice series. This is one of those CNN talking boxes. You know, you have 4 simultaneous quadrants of Judge Jeanine talking.
Oh, of Judge
crap
Jeanine?
About Muslims.
Yeah, okay. Well, she's terrible, and the timing
Fox
couldn't have been worse for her.
And actually pulled her, and so it's unclear what happens next. She's lost sponsorship, so has Tucker Carlson.
Yeah.
But we'll see what happens with that. Meanwhile, as you pointed out, the way the Washington Post covered it is a church service on a blue sky Sunday interrupts Trump's weekend of presidential peak.
Yeah, that's basically what happened.
He was talking smack about the dead John McCain.
Yep.
And he was saying all sorts of nasty things about Saturday Night Live, and they should be investigated, and you name it, he was doing it. While that happened...
Wasn't it a rerun?
Yeah, it was. It was the George Bailey show.
See, I didn't watch it, and I saw him grousing, but I'm like, oh, yeah, now I'll go watch it. Thanks, dummy.
Thanks. You know, a lot of that, while that's happening, the GOP, the Romney-McDaniel, runner Romney-McDaniel, who refuses to use Romney, was tweeting out an incredibly offensive tweet about Beto O'Rourke on St. Patrick's Day, sticking him in a cartoon, leprechaun top hat, and with a disheveled picture of him.
Yes.
And it says, "Please drink responsibly." On this St. Patty's Day, a special message from noted Irishman Robert Francis O'Rourke. So, you want to offend, by bringing up 19th, 20th, early 20th century tropes here.
Old school anti-immigration.
Yeah.
The return to principles, that's good.
I'm surprised they didn't put at the bottom in like little letters, P.S. he's a papist.
Yes, right. Why not?
They could have. I mean, it was that offensive.
It was pretty weird. That hat. I mean, I know they put it on leprechauns and cartoons and stuff. Is there any base? I'm just curious. Is there any basis in reality for that hat? Has anybody ever made?
I'm not
like
Irish.
Not
as
a joke.
I don't know. We do know that Emily Guskin at the Washington Post summed up a clear majority of Americans oppose Trump's emergency declaration. This is reflected in 6 polls taken from early January to early March by roughly 2-1. Americans oppose Trump's decision to use emergency powers to build a border wall, and that's a wider margin than the Senate resolution to overturn Trump's declaration, which passed 59-41. By the way, so Trump vetoes it, as I understand it. Nancy Pelosi then takes it up in the House for a veto override. Yeah. So whether that passes or not, it may not, but, she's not ignoring the symbolism of it any more than the symbolism of getting rid of Trump will somehow stop an actual impeachment vote should actual evidence come out. So that's one of the tempests in a teapot. Remember, Nancy Pelosi said the same thing she said every week about I don't see impeachment yet because the committees haven't done their work and the Mueller report isn't out. Remember the Mueller report, the one that was supposed to be out last Friday?
Yes, or maybe
not
they
out
meant
yet.
this Friday.
So, all of a sudden everybody mad at that was such last week news.
Right. Well, yes. And
which gives you an idea of why not to overreact to stuff.
That's true. I kind of waited it out long enough, I think, and now everybody has more or less forgotten about it because too many other dumb things are happening.
Right, and what you said didn't really change the fact that people are investigating.
Although it was interesting that she said, I say this every day, and juxtaposing that against, how she put it to the people who she was speaking to when she caused the controversy, which was, here's some news, you might not have this. I don't know. Maybe she was being facetious.
It's hard to tell. Here's some news. Sun rises in the east and sets in the west. What are you going to do about it?
I mean, it's interesting. She did say that this was news, but and she's also correct. She has said it before.
And it's hard to know whether people who are covering her really get that nuance.
That could be, I suppose. Anyway, she has said
That's
it
not
before,
meant to be a defense. I'm just saying that
it's just true that she has said it before. So, all right, whatever. Now we're over that, and she'll have an override vote. And I don't know whether she was scheduling that for this week, but we will see. I think they should just do the whole resolution over again. I mean, first you want to have an override vote.
And then here's another story. Former spa owner and frequent Mar-a-Lago guest sparks concerns about porous environment at President's Club. Can you imagine?
Oh,
Cindy Yang coming to Mar-a-Lago all the time and bringing Chinese businessmen with her, turning up everywhere. Her activities at Trump's private club in Palm Beach, Florida, have attracted attention in recent days after a spa she once owned was the target of a widely publicized sex trafficking sting involving the owner of the New England Patriots.
Right.
Scrutiny is also centered on a company Yang ran offering foreign visitors access to the president and other top Republican officials. I wonder if Elliot Brody and she know each other.
That's a good question, and not out of the ballpark by any means. This was also another...
Or Michael Cohen, the other co-chair of the Republican National Committee Finance group there.
Deputy Finance Chair. They didn't have a good crew, did they? Because wasn't Steve Wynn the other one?
Yeah, they took money from everywhere, in other words.
Yeah, so all the pervs and whatever. Okay, so that is pretty interesting. And this was another weekend of weird details about who's hanging out at Mar-a-Lago. There's another branch of that we can explore later on.
Right. While, that controversy with the impeachment and Pelosi is of note, another one of note is Ilhan Omar's very well-received op-ed in the Washington Post. We must apply our universal values to all nations. Only then will we achieve peace. Josh Marshall, Rosenberg, some of her biggest critics for some of her previous comments, noted this is actually a fair and balanced approach to Israel. Josh Marshall writes, the portion on Israel-Palestine is quite conventional, strong statement of the center-left two-state approach, and it's one I support, and I'd say a great number of American Jews do as well. Rosenberg right. Omar's section on Israel in this piece is quite reasonable and far better and less fraught than her off-the-cuff tweets on the subject, which suggests, among other things, that perhaps we're poorly served by reducing issues like the Israeli-Palestine conflict to 280 characters.
Yes, that may be true. It may suggest that she always had this in mind, or that she was open to consulting with people that could help her with more clarity.
It reflects well on her either way.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, that's good news.
If you did something wrong, if it was wrong and you correct yourself, that's great. And if you were misunderstood and you want to explain it better, that's also great. Of course, over the weekend, I noted that activists were attacking Chelsea Clinton.
Yes, this is another fun one.
Over Omar's remarks, which also I think is a tempest in the teapot that doesn't come to anything in the end. People just need to be a little bit more tolerant all around. They just do.
Yes, including, tolerance for flying off the handle for a brief period in the wake of a great tragedy. Okay, also. And I think we'll make room for that, and then we can be rid of the teapot.
I suppose. But hey, I'm a nice guy, and I think that, people should, offer the benefit of the doubt at least the first time somebody screws up.
Sure.
And after the third or fourth time, it's a pattern, it's a movement, then you can say, okay, well, they keep doing it. Like Donald Trump with white nationalism, it's no accident. And by the way, Stephen Miller's still in the White House. So he gets no benefit of the doubt, plus Central Park 5 and a whole history there. Oh, I'm not renting to black people, and you name it. I mean, that was the family business. So I don't apply that to him, and I don't necessarily apply it to Trump supporters in general. But if somebody says something you don't agree with, you don't have to jump on them immediately. Let them.
That's the sport, though.
Let them do it. I know it's a sport. And I don't like it.
Yeah, well, that's okay. I mean, you're right.
Well, anyway, let's talk about 2020 Democrats, because every time they do something, you have to jump on them because that's the sport.
I hate them all.
I hate them all. All right, let's jump on Andrew Yang.
Yes.
Remember Andrew Yang?
I do. Yeah.
He's running.
Right.
Is he going to be the breakout candidate that talks about issues? Well, he says the problem with deciding presidential elections via popular vote is that candidates would naturally campaign in urban areas with big media markets, and their policies would follow suit. Better to have proportional electoral college votes in each state so you can campaign everywhere. I read that and said, okay, you're done.
Oh, well, wait a second here.
Sorry. What about the fact that Democrats keep winning elections and then the Electoral College makes it so that the majority vote doesn't really ever happen? What about that?
That's basically
so
well done. Sorry. Yeah. Universal basic income, very interesting concept.
Thank you very much. But offer it. I hope you get into the debates and can speak.
I think
another guy I really want to get into debates and speak is Pete Buttigieg.
Yes.
The young and openly gay Midwest mayor who finds a voice in crowded Democratic presidential field, says the Washington Post, anointing him as a real candidate there. I'll tell you an interesting Pete Buttigieg story that I didn't know. He did pretty well in his CNN town hall.
Okay.
But somebody told a story about him that I didn't know. And that is that they were on the campaign trail with him and a reporter, an international reporter. I so much rather say international than foreign. Foreign sounds like they don't belong. An international reporter came up and asked him a question. He noticed she was Norwegian.
Oh.
And started speaking to her in Norwegian.
Well, like Santa Claus from
and she
Miracle
said,
on 34th
how in the world do you know Norwegian? And don't forget, he's Maltese.
Oh,
or at least Maltese origin.
I forgot that.
And he said, well, there was this author and wrote a really good book, but the only one of the many authors' books that was translated into English was this one book. So I learned Norwegian so I could read the rest.
What? Wow. All right.
And I was like, okay, well, that's not usually what you hear, let's say, from your average campaign-in-a-box Republican.
Right. I learned Norwegian. To read it. I mean, I used Google
to more
Translate
thoroughly read that author. Yes, I thought it was a great story.
How do you even, I don't know, Rosetta Stone? What do you do?
Anyway, you ask him questions, he actually has answers, so that'll be interesting.
Norwegian.
I really hope he gets into the debates. Meanwhile, the big story of the weekend is Beto O'Rourke announced.
Right, in Norwegian.
And he announced in English, as far as I know.
Well, that's good, too.
But it turns out Matt Grossman, who is a political scientist.
In Norwegian.
Who writes about the asymmetry of the parties.
Yes.
Expect an imminent temporary jump in Beto's poll numbers based on patterns in 2012 and 2016, which is to say news coverage leads to poll bumps. And Beto's entry into the race, into the race, was
French.
incredibly well covered compared to many of the other candidates. And how did that translate? Among other things, this morning, Beto reports a massive $6.1 million fundraising haul in the first 24 hours of the campaign. And that is something that actually is more even than Bernie's.
That's top of the list, I understand.
Which is top of the list. Yeah. So does that translate into anything of note? It may suggest grassroots organization. It may suggest enthusiasm. It may mean nothing. But the 24-hour haul is now a standard apples-to-apples comparison that the media makes with all of the candidates simply because it's one of the very rare things where you can actually compare one to the other.
Yeah. Well, that's a relatively that's interesting. 20 years ago, I don't think you had that because there was no way to count how much money you would get in one day. Day one.
Well, that's because Richard Gregory would send, emails or snail mail stuff, and it would take weeks to get the money back.
People would write a check.
Or forget it, or they lost it, or whatever. And it was all shadowy, and it was really hard to figure. Now, right away, between ActBlue and between other ways of using electronic ways of calculating, you can, run up a total fairly quickly and have an idea of what it is and share it.
Yes. All right. So he jumps out to the front. I understand a lot of people talking about how well played it was strategically. Apparently, he initially declined.
Well, somebody asked him, so what's it? He said, I don't know. I don't know if they'll release it. I guess we will. I don't know. And everybody said, especially Nate Silver said, well, that means he didn't reach his targets and he's embarrassed.
Yeah.
Well, actually, that's not what it meant at all.
Yeah, that meant he saw Nate Silver coming.
Maybe it meant it was just too much to add up right away.
Yeah, right. Or, as fast as it is to process things online, I haven't added it up yet. Okay. Well, anyway, news. I don't know what to make of it. Big, small, I don't know. He had a good weekend, and that's what I said to do on Friday when we were closing the show. Have a good weekend, and he heard it and he did it. So he listens to the show. There you go.
All right, and last of the name mentions, just because we want to be complete, this is a lightning round one. This is Molly Jongfest writing in the Bulwark, a progressive writing in the conservative The Bulwark about Bill de Blasio. You get the idea from the title. Bill de Blasio 2020 is a terrible idea. Somebody has to tell him. But there's this great picture on the front of this with a groundhog with lasers coming out of its eye.
That is a great picture. I haven't seen it, but that sounds great. Why?
Well, it's right here on the list I sent you. So.
Yeah, I'll have to look. There it is. It's a small part of a grand montage here, but why?
Right, but it really is a terrible idea for him to be running.
Yes. Is the groundhog a good idea or part of the bad idea?
Didn't he practically kill one?
I don't know. That's
I think he dropped one time when he was posturing for groundhog day.
Lasering. I'm gonna look.
Here it is. He was holding Staten Island Chuck in his giant paws. He dropped the groundhog from an enormous height. He's 6'5". And the poor groundhog didn't die immediately. He hung on like a good rodent, and then eventually the strain was too much on his little rodent organs, and 2 weeks later he died of acute internal injuries.
Oh, my God.
But wait, it gets worse.
Oh, what?
Then the Staten Island Zoo perpetrated a cover-up in an attempt to deflect blame from de Blasio, and by the way, to cover up the fact that they had been publicly misgendering the groundhog, who was actually a female. As I said, he's not very good at this stuff. I love Molly Jong-Fast's writing.
Do we know that the groundhog didn't identify female or male?
De Blasio was in South Carolina a few weeks after R. Kelly was indicted on 10 counts of sexual assault. The mayor came on stage to Kelly's music, which is bad enough, and then he tried dancing while flapping his arms like a bird or a helpless groundhog in freefall. Stop trying to make de Blasio 2020 happen.
All right. Well,
I think it's a very, very good conclusion.
Yeah. The lasers haven't been explained, but really, do you need an explanation for that? No.
I think what happens is that now when groundhogs see de Blasio, they sort of glare. That's all in capitals.
All right. So instead of looking daggers at him, they look lasers at him.
Well, it's,
is that
it's
a groundhog?
21st century.
I guess so.
But, I don't think he'll be the nominee. I just don't. So, again, you could say, all right, everybody just takes these individual points and makes a big deal out of them. But actually, sometimes it's pretty funny to make a big deal out of them, like Mitt Romney and the dog on the roof of his car.
Heights of trees, lemonade being wet.
That sort of thing. Lamp.
Yeah, he's a senator now.
Yeah, he likes lamp. But, he did vote against Trump on the major issue that he had a vote on, which is the emergency declaration. So, again, we'll see what happens with Nancy Pelosi. We'll see what the Senate does if it gets that far. But the point's been made, and the fact that the legal experts are all saying that the fact that both House and Senate voted to upend what Trump was doing lends credence to the court fights later when you're trying to figure out what the will of the Congress was. The Congress made their will pretty clear.
That is true. It did. And I hope that counts for something. And I hope they use this thing, and I don't know whether when they're going to have the override vote, and it's entirely possible that they don't get the numbers even in the House for the override vote, and that's the end of that chapter. But they really should think about offering literally the same resolution again. It occurred to me the other day that if you can really force the Senate to spend its time on that because it's a privileged resolution, I'd send a dozen every week and see if I can't prevent them from doing anything else.
So I'm going to end this with an article from Asted Herndon, who's a very good reporter, young reporter of color for the New York Times. He's a very good reporter, period. Okay. But, I just want to add that simply because the nuance that he picks up on the trail is really fascinating. This one is 2020 Democrats want to build a movement, not a traditional campaign.
I see it. Okay.
Alexandra Rojas was shocked, so was Waleed Shahid, the two local leaders of Justice Democrats, the advocacy group whose uncompromising style has made it a nuisance among Washington traditionalists, had a meeting request from aides to Senator Elizabeth Warren, fresh into her presidential campaign. As Mrs. Warren sought to push the party to the left by proposing expansive liberal policy ideas, it was clear her team was prepared to seek counsel from leading organizations that did the same. They want us in their court, Ms. Rojas said. They know that if they want to win, they need to have the support of the grassroots energy. And they mention a bunch of other candidates who are doing the same. In other words, they're not hiring the same old consultants doing the same old thing in the same old ways. They're not going back and getting the younger David Axelrods and James Carvilles. they're getting senior positions with a generation of activist-driven operatives. Now, how that translates on the trail remains to be seen. But good for them.
Yeah, I guess so. And it's a good, I don't know, it's a nice thing. It should be regarded as a nice acknowledgement of justice Democrats that there are candidates who aren't simply assuming that they're a Bernie Sanders campaign arm. They may end up backing him and only him, I suppose.
Or they may be individuals within there who turn out to be obnoxious, which doesn't necessarily represent the entire group of them, many of whom are actually working with the candidates and not just being a pain in the butt.
Yes. So it's a nice nod to what they've done and say, yeah, I'm not making any assumptions. Why would I assume that you wouldn't be in support of my agenda? That's the reason I'm running for president, is that I think everybody would.
Well, that's the thing. If you love your agenda and you don't necessarily like the candidate, that's okay. By the end of it, and I guess that's my overall greater point. There's a lot of great candidates with interesting agendas, from Andrew Yang to Elizabeth Warren and beyond. And at the end of it, there's going to be one candidate, one nominee selected, and they're going to steal the best of the ideas from all the others, because that's what happens every year, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, every 4 years we say there's nothing wrong with that, because we predict it's going to happen, and it does. So it doesn't really matter if Hillary Clinton stole Barack Obama's ideas or vice versa. He certainly stole some of hers, and that was great. It doesn't matter if Clinton and Sanders trade ideas. That's terrific. And now you have 15 different great ideas. Yes. And at the end of it, the best will be selected, because the ones that work will be modified. And the Democratic agenda, the policy platform coming out of this convention this year is, I think, going to be more interesting than usual.
I hope so, because it's very often quite boring. So this will be interesting test.
There's a low bar.
Yes,
but compare it to the platform on the other side, which is basically make America white again. Right. And I think this will be pretty interesting.
It will be. It'll be interesting to see what gets stolen from who, and I've got great suggestions about what to steal from people.
Exactly, and we say that with love and affection, not accusation. It's a good thing when stuff like that happens. Anyway, may the best candidate win, and I'm guessing they will, because that's the whole idea of the winnowing process, and I think it still works. So with that, I will leave you. I got to go run off to work.
Okay.
But this is Greg Dworkin speaking with my good friend David Waldman Kagro in the morning, whose electronic equipment apparently still works well enough to do the show, although it does need a little bit more backup. So we'll continue to give him advice, and he'll get advice from all of you out there, and then he'll do what he needs to do when he's ready. In the meantime, I'll talk to you on Wednesday, and we'll see what happens during the week.
All right, very good. The week will probably be basically over by Wednesday.
I would hope so. It usually is.
Very good.
Except for Mueller Friday.
Well, we haven't had one of those in a while, so maybe we're due.
We are due.
Take care. Great. Thanks, Greg. You do the same. Lots to round up here. Yeah, we're making slow progress. It takes me an awful long time to pull the trigger on any purchase, really, but certainly one as hefty as a nice new MacBook Pro laptop. And I want to make sure I get as far out on the spectrum of power and processing heft as I can, so that it remains contemporary and usable for as long as possible. And we got a lot of computer breakdowns at the moment, not all of which are related to the show, but we do keep a resident PC here as well, and it's being replaced because that's what the rest of the family uses for all of their regular everyday word processing and schoolwork type needs. So we're going to try out one of those all-in-one units, which seem like a bad idea to me, but I'm very interested. Since I use the PC for only the most simplistic stuff, the idea of decluttering the workstation seems like a pretty good idea. So, but there's an expense involved in that, and trying to decide whether an off-the-shelf from the Apple store or wherever else, at this point you can get them at Best Buy, an off-the-shelf MacBook makes sense. Exploring the possibility of refurbished, but I'm thinking maybe if I buy the hottest, newest, then it'll last a little longer or stay current a little longer. All of these things are entering into it. And then, of course, the sorrow with which I would have to part with thousands of dollars. Well, it ain't easy. But anyway, the good news is we got good advice last time, so I'm open to listening to good advice this time. No bad advice, please. We got great advice, I think, and making the transition to the Mac Mini to run the show. But I just want to make sure that everything is ready to go, and we can take the show mobile if necessary. Plenty of backup. Also, now finally, since I'm committed to spending money, gonna do the battery backup thing. And then I realized, I need two of them because my, the Wi-Fi and the router comes into the house one place and the workstation's at another. So I'm gonna need battery backup on one unit over there and another larger one, and I have to make sure that I get one. Do I really want one big enough to? What if the power goes out in the first minute of the show? Do we really want to be able to just do the rest of the? How much do I need? What kind of unit do I need to be able to run the show uninterrupted on battery backup for 2 hours, and then be able to edit later on as well and post the? I suppose I could get away with a poor editing job in the podcast, but you might need like 2 hours of backup for a fairly substantial computer setup. So I got to research all of that and make sure that we get the right stuff. The idea is eventually we'll have all the holes patched. Not only will we have robust backup, but I guess we'll be bulletproof at some point as well. And, you, the listener, deserve this. And if I don't believe that, then I can convince myself I want no worries and less inconvenience should something go wrong. So how much does it cost to buy that? Well, that's at a premium. Anyway, we're now coming up on our top of the hour break. And good, that gives us a minute to kick back, relax, and scan every single one of 50 potential stories for coverage during the second hour of Kagro in the Morning, coming up after this break. Although now I realize I've given myself 30 seconds of music before we get to cut out. Let's see what's on the horizon and see if we can sort some of this stuff out. We probably should return to the story of MBS having some power stripped. Since we were talking about battery backups, we might as well talk about power strips as well. I think that makes a great segue. I don't know. I'll be right back and tell you what makes a better segue after this. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Had a little difficulty visually finding the mute-unmute button today. All right. And scanning Twitter in primitive form to try and find out if there's any hot tips that we need to check into. And there are. Let's see. Just scrolling through here to what has happened since beginning the show. Let's see. As it turns out, I guess we've had tips from a couple listeners noting that is it Kellyanne Conway out there? Yeah. Okay. Aaron Rupar noting for all of us that Kellyanne Conway is on Fox and Friends, urging people to read the New Zealand shooter's entire bigoted manifesto, in which he describes Trump as a, quote, symbol of renewed white identity and common purpose, unquote, because she thinks studying it will somehow prove Trump didn't really inspire him. Okay. I mean, no, it will probably prove to everyone but Trump cultists that Trump did inspire him, because it says Trump inspired me, basically. But everybody noting, as Kevin Cruz did, just a White House advisor urging everyone to go read the manifesto of a white supremacist terrorist. Pretty standard stuff. And what do you want me to tell you about that? That's just, that's just nuts. And it's sad, crazy, insane that White House staffers are saying, yeah, everybody should read this thing. I don't know what to tell you. On the subject, though, of the shootings in New Zealand, I guess I will note for completeness, for the record, Shannon Watts noticed at some point during the weekend that the NRA and NRA spokesperson Dana Loesch have been, as Shannon puts it, have been lying that the man who chased away the gunman in New Zealand when he went on to the second mosque was armed, which I don't know whether it was just intentional garbage lie, which is entirely within Dana Loesch's repertoire to simply say, oh yeah, he was an armed resistor and he shot at the guy, and I'll just say that, or whether confusion over the initial reporting led her to believe that to be the case in good faith, but then it turned out not to be. I don't think she has retracted anything, but I don't know. I'm not reading what Dana Loesch has to say. Apparently, well, let me see. What is now I'm curious. Dana Loesch, her tweet is included in Shannon Watts's tweet to lay out precisely how the provenance of this story. But Dana Loesch's tweet says, good guy with a gun, make terrorists afraid of ever targeting innocents again. And she includes the tweet of Ryan Saavedra, who is a reporter with the Daily Wire, which I don't know anything about it. And that tweet reads, breaking, the New Zealand Herald reports that the shooting at the second mosque was stopped by an armed Muslim who, quote, chased the shooters and fired 2 shots at them as they sped off. Now, it turns out that there is, and Loesch continues on there, for a few out there attempting to take issue with this, it was reported by the New Zealand Herald here, and they did report that, but it turns out perhaps not to be the case. It doesn't look like she retracts it at any point. I think she's just sort of standing by the statement that the New Zealand Herald said that, and apparently they did. There are also a couple other, links. I wouldn't necessarily say she's done herself great credit with those links. They are the Daily Mail, which is actually perhaps tops of the list, not just where she placed it on the list, but tops of the list in terms of the reliability of the reporting. The other one is newshub.co.nz, New Zealand, and I don't know anything about that, whether that's, that could very well be an aggregator of, or one company's, one legitimate press, print journalism outlet in New Zealand. I just don't know enough about New Zealand press. The third one here is what leads me to wonder why you would even include it, but I guess she needed a third in order to look like she had really done her homework. But this one points to weaselzippers.us. Now, right away, as I'm clicking to get the URL and thinking about including it in my tweet, I'm like, is there another? Do I have a Newsweek or something? I don't know. And now I'm going to click on it. It's good clickbait. Weasel Zippers. I don't know. No, I'm not going to click on it. What the hell could weaselzippers.us possibly be? Anyway, the real point here is being made by Shannon Watts, which is bolstered by a link to the USA Today coverage of the story, which I think is probably relatively reliable and also has the benefit of another day's worth of hindsight and processing, I think. And as is the case with many such stories, I wonder if I'm going to have to pause some video here in a second. As is the case with many such stories, initial reporting often has errors. However they come to be, they're wrong. USA Today should be pretty reliable, although, again, the story did happen in New Zealand. Maybe newshub.co.nz has a better handle on things. Now, I guess we should look and see what are they reporting now, and what does the New Zealand Herald say now for the real answer. But then we'll start by saying that the USA Today story is a fascinating one, but makes clear that the man who really risked it all in order to save people, it certainly appears he saved a lot of people at the second mosque, was not armed, but you'll get a sense for how that conclusion was reached by reading the article. Is it very long? I don't think so. I skimmed through it before to try to get a sense of what was up. How a hero in New Zealand mosque attack used cat and mouse chase, shooter's own gun to save lives. That's where the confusion began. Apparently, at some point during this attack, the shooter drops intentionally. I think he abandons a gun that is emptied. I think a handgun. And this guy picks it up and it tries it to see if there's any rounds left in it, and finds that it is empty. He would have shot the guy, I guess, if he could have, but that too wouldn't really make him an armed resistor. That would be, a guy who picked up a gun and that was abandoned by the shooter. The shooter, if the shooter is bringing the weapons you're relying on for your resistance, great, I guess, but that doesn't really qualify you as an armed bystander who intervenes. But it really is a tremendous story in terms of what thinking went on at the time. The death toll of Friday's terrorist attack in New Zealand that killed 50. I really didn't want to go over the details again of that part, but it did. It's one sentence. It killed 50, could have been higher if not for the actions of a man that witnesses and survivors are calling a hero, and that the NRI really wanted to show is an armed resistor, because everyone generally agrees that he saved many, many lives, and there was some basis for thinking he might be an armed resistor initially. I'm sure they very much wanted to seize on this. Also interesting to note, of course, he's a member of this mosque, which means he's Muslim, so don't be surprised when you find out that the hero of the story, NRA, is Abdul Aziz. And I know that that disappoints you a great deal because you're largely racist. Anyway, Abdul Aziz, 48, likely saved lives when he engaged the gunman in a cat-and-mouse chase outside the mosque and later grabbed one of the shooter's own guns that had been tossed to the ground. He used that firearm to smash the windshield of the gunman's car, prompting him to speed away. Aziz and witnesses of one of the two mosque shootings at Christchurch say, according to the Associated Press and other media outlets. Aziz gave his account in an on-camera interview with New Zealand-based News Hub. There's my answer. He was at Linwood Mosque, where 8 people were killed. The shooter had arrived by vehicle, thanks for being descriptive, from Al Noor Mosque, a couple miles away, where he had already gunned down 41 people. Those figures were based on earlier reports before one more victim died Sunday at one of the scenes. Aziz is then quoted as saying, "I got to be honest, it wasn't me, it was God who saved everybody." His actions began when the gunman arrived and advanced toward the mosque, killing those in his path. Aziz picked up a nearby credit card machine. I don't know what it was doing nearby. I don't know exactly what the machine is, but it sounds, well, one, it's portable, and two, still has some heft to it, and I think he thought, this is my only weapon. But check this out. Aziz picks up this nearby credit card machine and ran outside as the gunman approached, yelling, "Come here." He's drawing attention to himself in order to draw it away from the mosque. Aziz, who had 4 children inside the mosque, said the gunman started shooting his way and that he ducked between cars in the parking lot. His goal was to distract the shooter so others who were inside could escape. Now, at first, his plan didn't work. I wanted him to chase me in the car park, as it would save more people in the masjid, which as a terminology I am not familiar with, and I assume is what people who actually would visit the mosque would call it. So, okay, good learning there. But he didn't see me, probably, he said. He said the gunman ran back to his car to get another gun, and Aziz hurled the credit card machine at him, according to the Associated Press. He said he could hear his 2 youngest sons, aged 11 and 5, urging him to come back inside. I can imagine why they wanted that, but sounds like he had a better plan. Aziz then went to the back and picked up a gun the shooter had abandoned that was next to a dead body. He squeezed the trigger, but it had no bullets. He said he continued to see gunshots flying through the mosque, and so he yelled out, "I'm outside! Come outside!" The gunman dropped the gun he was using, Aziz said in a separate interview with The Sun. The shooter then returned to his car for a second time to grab another loaded rifle, which, by the way, I guess is the only limits on these things. Just like the Sutherland Springs church shooting here in the United States, and very similar to it, gun enthusiasts and NRA spokespeople afterwards, they consider that one to have been stopped by an armed parishioner. And again, highly questionable. What ended up happening was the Sutherland Springs shooter, I guess, brought 15 magazines with him and emptied all of them inside the church. And once he was out of ammunition, returned to his car. I don't know whether he thought he had more there or not. At that point, a neighbor and parishioner who I guess hadn't been at the service but was at home and heard the gunfire, came out with a weapon and confronted the shooter, who then closed his car door and drove away. But they were like, oh, an armed bystander has stopped the mass shooting. Well, he fired every round he had and killed everybody he could, went back to his car, having been confronted, left, and then went and shot himself. And this happens all the time in terms of NRA's claims about these things. Well, he went and shot himself because he was finally being confronted with somebody who was on equal terms with him. Maybe, maybe not, I don't know, but that's a pretty weak claim. Here, to say the guy was armed, an armed bystander stopped the shooting, is pretty wild as the claim goes too. He was armed with a credit card machine and he threw at the guy. And again, the limitation on the shooting is the guy runs out of ammunition and goes back to get more, which is also perhaps a great argument for limiting magazine size, but okay, that's another subject. So here, this guy throws the thing at him. He goes back to get another gun. And now, though, in addition to having thrown the credit card thing, he has this other empty gun that the shooter abandoned the first time. That's when Aziz said he threw the gun he had picked up like an arrow at the windshield of the shooter's car. It blasted his window, and he thought I probably shot him or something. And he drove off, and I kept chasing him, he said. Aziz said the gunman shouted expletives at him before he sped off. So take that. Some expletives for you. Video from another driver indicates that the police officers managed to force the car from the road and drag the suspect out soon after. And so I think that's where it came from. I think the shooter thought he was being shot at because I guess he saw that the guy had picked up his gun or whatever. Maybe he didn't know it was his gun. But I guess even in throwing the weapon, I don't know whether it was a rifle. He says he threw it like an arrow. I guess he means like a spear, which suggests to me that maybe it was a rifle and not a handgun. But at any rate, the shooter, I guess, sees Aziz there with a gun. Next thing you know, loud noise and his windshield is blown out. I think it's reasonable for the shooter at that point to assume he's being shot at, and he takes off. So from there, I guess it's reasonable that News Hub and Weasel Zipper and everybody else thought that shots had been fired and there was an armed bystander. But there wasn't. So that's the answer to that. Also, something there wasn't was, like every other mass shooting of this sort, the initial reports were that there could be multiple gunmen. Everyone recognizes that, and you all know what I'm going to say about that. The multiple gunman trope. And one day there will be multiple gunmen, and we'll all be sorry about that. But that combined with initial witness reports that said, oh, I think that the gunman had automatic weapons because no one could pull the trigger that fast. Once again, a reminder, no, it doesn't take automatic weapons to do this. No, it doesn't take multiple shooters to do this much damage in this little amount of time. And yes, regular off-the-shelf weapons that you can buy anywhere, although not for long, I guess, in New Zealand, can fire without modification as rapidly enough, well, one, to kill 50 people very quickly, and two, to sound like it must be automatic gunfire because nobody could pull the trigger that quickly. No word, I haven't seen yet, whether he had any kind of bump stock accessories or anything like that. But again, when you're just spraying into crowds, you can bump fire particularly a rifle, pretty easily without any additional equipment. So once again, just a reminder, no, it doesn't take multiple gunmen. No, it doesn't take a machine gun to do this. Anybody can do it. Hooray. So that's great news for all the rest of us. All right. I think that is it by way of bits and pieces of the New Zealand situation. Although I did have a related piece that I thought might make for good follow-up, both on what we did on Friday in talking about the Connecticut case where the families of the Sandy Hook victims were suing the makers of the Bushmaster rifle. Let's see, what did I grab this for? A piece at MikeTheGunGuy.com, a very interesting, place that occasionally they actually talk some sense about guns. It bills itself as a magazine with news and notes from both sides about guns. So I don't really love both sidesing everything, but he had a short piece here that said, what happened at Sandy Hook? And I thought it was of some importance. Perhaps we can transition by talking more gun stuff. It took the Connecticut Supreme Court more than 15 months to issue a ruling in the Sandy Hook case, but when the opinion was announced, it was a doozy. You remember this from Friday. Not only did the court reverse the Superior Court's ruling and hold for the plaintiff against the gunmaker whose product was used to kill 26 adults and children at the Sandy Hook Elementary School, but the decision got right to the fundamental issue which the gun industry has been trying to wish out of existence for at least the last 20 years. When gunmakers realized that hunting was going the way of the dial telephone, they came up with a brilliant marketing plan to keep the factories humming. Namely, the idea of guns being as being essential for self-defense. Very interesting, the thought here. And I don't know whether it mirrors everybody else's thoughts about gun marketing, but hunting, which was what the NRA typically focused on because everyone thought, well, the idea of staying armed at home to resist Soviet invasion doesn't seem very likely. And the idea of resisting our own government doesn't sound all that appealing to most people. They came up with the idea that crime was rampant and home invasion was rampant, and what you really needed was self-defense, not just AR-15s, but also daily handgun carry, and you should be able to carry it with you everywhere you go. And he makes mention of the Heller case in a few minutes. I'll continue on with his more organized thoughts. Now, the fact that most Americans never find themselves in a situation where they need protection from a criminal threat isn't at issue here. What is at issue is that enough consumers believed this malarkey to keep the gun industry from sliding into the red. With the advent of terrorism, non-ending battle engagements in the Near East, and a generalized fear that something like 9/11 might happen again, however, the whole notion of armed self-defense was transmogrified into messaging which blurred the traditional boundary between civilian and military weapons, with the gun industry finding its strongest new market in something called tactical guns. Of course, the gun industry also knew, particularly after the Heller decision in 2008, that they couldn't push this move into military-style armaments too far because Scalia specifically refused to grant Second Amendment protection to what he referred to as weapons of war. So, the industry invented the idea that guns like the AR-15 weren't military weapons. They were, quote, modern sporting weapons, meaning that the word sporting could be applied to any gun which fired in semi-automatic mode. The Connecticut Supreme Court decision is quite lengthy, primarily because it deals not only with the state laws covering consumer protection, but it also explains in detail why the gun industry in this instance cannot use the federal tort immunity law to shield itself from legitimate damage claims. And on page 12 of the opinion, the rubber meets the road with the following accurate and very strong text. The AR-15 and M16 are highly lethal weapons that are engineered to deliver maximum carnage with extreme efficiency. Several features make these rifles especially well suited for combat and enable a shooter to inflict unparalleled carnage. That's how come people always think that there's multiple shooters and machine guns involved. Rapid semi-automatic fire, quote, unleashes a torrent of bullets in a matter of seconds, unquote. The ability, this is all still a quote as a matter of fact, but that's a quote from some other source. The ability to accommodate large capacity magazines allows for prolonged assaults. Now back to Mike the Gun Guy's thoughts. Folks, the Connecticut Supreme Court got it right. The AR-15 wasn't designed to be a sporting gun unless you want to define sport as the ability to kill 26 human beings in 4 minutes or less. Less time than that, really. You just needed time to find them. And if a shooter can deliver that amount of lethal firepower in such a short period of time, it makes the idea of differentiating between full auto and semi-automatic modes a stupid and sick joke. That I like. Good point. What happened at Sandy Hook is that someone used a product that is too dangerous and too lethal for civilian sale. Because the product was used precisely in the way it was designed to be used, to kill as many human beings as possible in the briefest period of time. In all of this, my great regret is that in order to force the gun industry to acknowledge the lethality of this product, beautiful and precious lives had to be lost. So I think a good point here in making all this. Some interesting reactions, of course. And somebody, I don't know from what direction they're objecting here, but they note that the guy at Virginia Tech killed quite a few people using a handgun or guns. So it will be interesting to see how handguns end up in all of this. And the answer to that is handguns can fire just as quickly as AR-15s and can bump fire just as easily. So yeah, good point. We should, by all rights, be doing what New Zealand is doing, considering getting rid of all of them. And, when you bring that up and people say, but that's millions of guns. Yeah, it is. We have a problem with having that many millions of guns in the country. Sorry. All right. Time to move on, though. Let's see. So many other things to explore, but I think because, again, we're coming up on another break, and that gives us just one more segment, getting a sense of what we'll share Tuesday and later in the week, and what we can get to today. Before the break, there's just not that much. However, let's see. We can go with teaser for the upcoming information on Saudi-owned Arabia. Let's see. There's probably some domestic work we got to get to too in the last couple of minutes. I guess what I'll throw in there as we approach the break is something else we hinted at earlier. There's a weird other branch of Mar-a-Lago weirdness and Pervalago weirdness, branching out, not necessarily from the Cindy Yang story, but, from a source not too far removed from it, which I don't know what to make of it just yet, but, every once in a while I dip my toe into the somewhat conspiratorial waters explored by our Twitter friend Wouter Vanderhorst. And I gotta say, I'm not certain I can make this connection yet. Exactly who is this person? What are they doing there? But it's awfully suspicious, and it got more suspicious in light of the surfacing of through the Elliot Broidy story and the ProPublica information that they were able to glean about that raid. One of the people that came up in all this, Greg mentioned the Miami party promoter. I'm not certain who this guy is, and maybe we should read that story too. But this, when they say party promoter, it's a specific kind of party promoter, which if you combine it with the Pervolago reputation and the latest news coming out of there and who hangs out there, not really a good look. This Miami party promoter, the way he promoted parties was, if you were having a party that you wanted to be a hot property, the coolest party in town, down here in Miami or Mar-a-Lago, where have you, he would essentially, you could hire models to hang out at your party. That was his business. We'll send hot chicks to hang out at your party. Kind of a skeevy business. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. As I scan the story here, and I'm trying to find, I'm actually taking a look back at my archives in Pocket. But now I'm screwing things up, I think, and getting in my own way. But I wanted to go to the ProPublica story, and we'll spend more time on the larger picture of it, I'm sure, later in the week. We're just not going to have time to do it today. But I wanted to skip down to this part, which I thought was really kind of strange. The search warrant for Broidy's office also lists a name and corporation not previously linked to Broidy, Joel Rousseau, Rouseau, and Intelligent Resources. And that would be a good kind of resources to have, I think. Intelligent sorts. Well, why are this in here? There is a company by that name incorporated in Miami Beach by a Joel Rousseau, but with two S's, who is a friend of, is this Michael's or Michelle's? Michel. Who is that? Since I skipped a significant portion of this, here's one mention. Pras Michel, a member of the hip-hop group The Fugees. I sound like an idiot now, not knowing how to pronounce the name or who he is, but okay, The Fugees I recognize. And an associate of Lowe's, and who Lowe is, I skipped the whole thing here. Oh, yes, Malaysian financier Joe, Jho, Lowe, who is at the center of the sprawling international scandal known as 1MDB. We've mentioned it, but haven't paid a great deal of attention. Well, Michelle here is a associate of Lowe's and funneled the money to pay Broidy into the United States somehow. Okay, that's allegedly according to the Justice Department. So anyway, just to give you some semblance of context here. So Joel Rousseau, a friend of Michelle's, is the head of Intelligent Resources. The search warrant does not describe Rousseau or Intelligent Resources' role in the case. Rousseau's Instagram account shows him bouncing from Rio to Paris to Ibiza, frequently surrounded by models. Oh, okay, great. If you want to be successful, it says here, if you want to be successful, you need the beautiful people, he, Rousseau, told Crain's New York in 2007, which described him as a specialist, quote, in bringing agency models to clubs, unquote. This practice now seems familiar. And I was searching back to find our archived articles about it. I definitely have. I had a series of articles, and some of them were related, and some of them we've shared in the past. The way Trump used to market the condos at the towers he was building in Manhattan and integrate the operation with his beauty pageants and modeling agency, that it was all about getting a bunch of booze, and some people say a lot of drugs, up into what were then unoccupied units in the building that Trump reserved for big parties like this. He would invite, Manhattan's wealthy pervs, basically, to come over and party, drink, and I guess if there were drugs, use the drugs, and he would populate the party with women that he probably had to strong arm into coming over, or maybe he did. Maybe they were willing to go because he was promising them access to wealthy guys who would be willing to pay them or treat them to gifts and expensive dinners, etc., possibly in exchange for their companionship. And they should come to these parties. And after all, why not? Free drinks, maybe some drugs, rich guys. Sounds great, right? But apparently he would mine the ranks of his pageants and modeling agency to populate these parties and to make it seem like, hey, this is what goes on in Trump properties all the time. Just buy a condo here and we'll have parties like this all the time. If you buy in, I'll, of course, invite you to future sales parties here and at other buildings as well because you're a cool guy. And so began or so continued our exploration of the Trump world as a sex cult. I'll buy one of these $1 million condos because I'll get laid by models all the time, or at least I'll have the opportunity to do that in Trump world. And it worked. Anyway, this guy, Rousseau, whose name came up in the raid at Broidy's, and Broidy's got no clean reputation in this respect to begin with. This guy's name comes up, his company comes up, and he's in the business of bringing agency models to clubs and, parties and to up their profile, right? I'll just finish up with a little bit of this here so we know who Rousseau is. In another series of pictures on his Facebook page, he is at an oil site, interestingly enough, in Haiti, Fuji's, with workers he describes as his drilling crew. Rousseau made a foray into politics in 2012 when he donated tens of thousands of dollars to several Democratic Party groups. Money's money. People like it. Filings in a court case over unpaid taxes describe Rousseau as a, quote, entrepreneur with income swinging from under $1,000 in 2009 to over $2 million in 2013. He paid a long-standing bill for back taxes, which is unusual for this crowd, and penalties of more than $700,000 in late 2017, the filings show. The address for Intelligent Resources is a house on Miami Beach's exclusive Hibiscus Island. The person answering the door at the house last week told a reporter he had rented the house on Airbnb. Rousseau didn't respond to requests for comment. Very interesting, and a common theme, both at the fringes, really, and at the heart, honestly, of Trump world is fake it till you make it. It's full of fake it till you make it people of all sorts. I don't know what's up with this guy, but in 2009, no income whatsoever. 2013, $2 million. Intelligent Resources address in a house on Miami Beach's exclusive Hibiscus Island, but the guy who answers the door says he rented it from Airbnb. Could be a lie, like that could have been Rousseau, and he didn't want to talk to reporters, or it could be true. Guy could have rented it on Airbnb, and it could just be, when I was flush with cash, I bought an expensive address in Miami Beach. And the idea of which was, when I need a venue for a hot party that makes sense, that there'll be hot models there, and I want rich people who might give me more money to think I'm one of them, we have it at the house on Hibiscus Island. The rest of the time, though, I don't really live there. I can't afford that. The rest of the time, it's Airbnb'd out to try and pay the mortgage on this thing. And I only reserve it for my own use when I need it to look like I'm a rich guy. It's not uncommon. And I said there was a weird theme going on, and I meant it. Wouter van der Horst, or Der Wouter, as we see him on Twitter, randomly, I don't know what drove him to do it. I happen to notice these things at odd times. Tweeting a picture of a blonde woman and a very large, bald-headed guy in the frame here. It's from a video here. And he tweets, "How did this young Russian website bride go from inhaling nitrous oxide, I guess, NOx, he puts here, nitrous oxide from a whipped cream bottle," that's what she's doing in here, "to running a modeling agency?" Well, that's an easy transition, maybe. "Oh, a modeling agency with access to Mar-a-Lago." Well, that might be slightly different. "Only in America," he hashtags this thing, and there's a little tweet storm that follows. "Need to class up your next event?" Is the next tweet. It is illustrated with a screen grab from theshygirls.com, offering services they call ambiance improvement. Need to give your venue a lift? Or I should say, need to give your menu a lift, because it is punctuated with an exclamation point rather than a question mark, because, of course, it is run by a Russian immigrant who doesn't have that great a command of the language, unless she's got a perfect command and she's ordering you to give your venue a lift. Shy Girls offers models in camouflage. Not that they're wearing camouflage. You get the idea. The models in camouflage to encourage local crowds to pick up your something is blocked here. Your party or whatever on any selected night. What they mean by models in camouflage is they're models, and I guess they're supposed to come to the party and pretend they're just friends of yours and guests who, maybe they also happen to dabble in modeling. But the idea is that they're supposed to mingle with guests and pretend that they're not there as hired models. Well, that's okay. That's the same business model we were talking about with Rousseau here. Wouter continues here, or perhaps you're thinking way outside the box is the next tweet. This one is illustrated from the Instagram account of the Shy Girls, and it just reads, "A child of nature," and is illustrated with a palm tree emoji. And all it is a model who appears to be completely nude, posed strategically so that it would be, I don't know that they'd have to pixelate anything on television to get this thing, but sort of a weird, photo, no explanation given for why this totally legitimate modeling agency decides to send this one out. Anyway, either way, Werder says, call Anna, and includes a link to yet another Instagram. The personal Instagram account of Anna Lapaeva, I'm guessing is her last name, Lapaeva. Her Instagram has a underscore at the end if you want to find her there. This particular page, her entry from, you'll never guess the location. Oh, you will guess the location, Mar-a-Lago. "Let's make America great again," she says in her January 19th, 2018 post. "Even though I am not into politics," wink wink, "I attend events like #Trumpets Night to educate myself, meet people. I realize there could easily be 2,000 people there controlling 50% of the world's wealth." I think that's overstating things a bit for the Mar-a-Lago crowd, but I'm certain they're rich. "Diamonds and furs." Yes, it was freezing last night. "Worth about $1 billion. The show and the showing off was so ridiculous," which she, of course, didn't revel in any way. Roberta Lynn, whom I haven't heard of before. She is 88. That's a nice comment. Could not stop talking when she got the microphone, just like Oprah at the Golden Globes. What I found the funniest, when someone, I think Roberta's son, came up to the stage to let her know that it's time to finish her speech, she kept going. "For all that millions I donated to Trump's campaign, I am going to have my moment." Yeah, like 30 minutes of fame. Loved it. But the idea here is there's a a video included here in which Anna Lepeyeva, in her heavy Russian accent, says, "Let's make America great again." And it's very interesting, and it's another person you need to keep an eye on, and just another weird, wacky coincidence where somebody involved in a kind of shady, not quite totally legitimate business, Shy Girls, also known, by the way, also doing business under the name of Wow Models, is a Mar-a-Lago regular and has the job of bringing hot, sexy women to spice up the scene at Mar-a-Lago for 88-year-olds, I guess, for no apparent reason. This, by the way, she's attending parties during the weekend of the party that was supposed to celebrate the first anniversary of Trump's inauguration, and I think that was the one he initially had to miss because of his first government shutdown. And then I think he did it to himself again the second time around because he's a moron. But anyway, I guess I just wanted to spend a little bit of time putting on the record that now, essentially, another weirdo person with a highly questionable business model just happens to have pretty much free access to hanging out at Mar-a-Lago, and it's kind of troubling. And in any other world, the idea that many scam artists with that much compromise in their business model would be allowed to hang out unmonitored by the Secret Service where the president prefers to spend as much of his time as possible. I think that's strange. It was just plain weird last night. This morning, it's just a little weirder when you find out that, yeah, federal authorities raiding Elliot Broidy's office are after another such person in the same business, which has so much in common with what Trump's actual business used to be. And it's well within recent memory that he was populating his sales parties with models. Well within recent memory that he was populating his Trump vodka launch parties with models. That he was populating his Trump vodka Super Bowl parties with underage models who were serving the vodka naked and body painted. But hey, whatever. Nothing weird to see here. No problems. Everybody just look the other way. Whatever. Okay, sure. I felt like that needed to be put on the record, even though there's so many other things that have so much more gravitas, let's say. Plus, there's some frivolous things that we have to get to, too. All right. Because it was promised, we'll take a look before we close things out at the situation in Saudi-owned Arabia, and there's the power stripping part, and what else? There was another entry in the Saudi Arabia sweepstakes here too. Let me see if I can scroll. It's not too far down here, but now not certain I can bring the story immediately to mind. What was it? Okay. Well, maybe I'll just go with the power stripping idea to see how credible we really think that thing is going to be. I know I had something else on Saudi Arabia, but all right, we'll stick with this one for the moment. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's powers have been stripped, according to a report here in the Daily Beast. Saudi Crown Prince MBS has been stripped of some of his financial and economic authority, The Guardian reports. And is there a link to the Guardian piece here? No. How interesting. Okay, so it's just a little excerpt. The heir to the Saudi crown has been absent from a number of high-profile meetings in recent weeks, the paper says. One of the Saudi kingdom's key advisors, Musaid Al-Aiban, I'm guessing, will now take over investment affairs on the king's behalf. Interesting. In the crown prince's absence. Does he have a good relationship with Jared or not? The kingdom did not confirm the Guardian's story. Instead, a spokesman for the Saudi embassy in D.C. told the paper it is customary for the King of Saudi Arabia to issue a royal order delegating the power to administer the affairs of state the state, he means his state, to his deputy, the Crown Prince, whenever he travels abroad. Any insinuation to the contrary is simply baseless. That was meaningless. The report follows the New York Times' revelation, that's the story I had somewhere, of a hit squad called the Saudi Rapid Intervention Group that was formed by the man known as MBS and relied upon for as much as 2 years before the October 2018 murder of Washington Post writer Jamal Khashoggi to execute, quote, the surveillance, kidnapping, detention, and torture of Saudi dissidents on the Crown Prince's orders. So what happened to that story? Why I'm not seeing it immediately towards the top of things, I have no idea. But yes, there was a very recent report that MBS kept this squad at the ready and that Khashoggi wasn't his first use of it, which was rather startling to read in print, but I think surprised very few people. Why is that? Can it be that it was really dragged under by the weight of so many other stories? I feel like that should have been closer to the top of things. But I'll have to grab that story at least. And, well, one, I'd like to read it because I thought I had put it aside. But share it with you here. Let's see. So it was a New York Times. And what was it? Saudi Rapid Intervention. Okay, let's see if we can find this thing here. There's the Al Jazeera report of it. I know that but they said it was a New York Times piece. Well, maybe someone else will link to it. We'll see. The Hill usually links to where those reports came from. There we are. New York Times story. Let's just go straight to that. Saudi Crown Prince's brutal drive to crush dissenters began before Khashoggi. I mean, that's the key part of the news there, and I don't know if we need to read through the entirety. We won't be able to read through the entirety of the story, but that's the key piece here, and the part that everybody's talking about, and the part that helps us make some sense of where this Khashoggi insanity actually came from. A little bit of the lead here. MBS authorized the secret campaign to silence dissenters, which included surveillance, kidnapping, detention, and torture of Saudi citizens over a year before the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, according to American officials who have read classified intelligence reports about the campaign. At least some of the clandestine missions were carried out by members of the same team that killed and dismembered Mr. Khashoggi in Istanbul in October, suggesting that his killing was a particularly egregious part of a wider campaign to silence Saudi dissidents, according to the officials and associates of some of the Saudi victims. Members of the team that killed Khashoggi, which American officials called the Saudi Rapid Intervention Group, were involved in at least a dozen operations starting in 2017, the officials said. Some of the operations involved forcibly repatriating Saudis from other Arab countries and detaining and abusing prisoners in palaces belonging to the Crown Prince and his father, King Salman. The officials and associates said no word on whether that included the Ritz-Carlton. But where could the Saudis have gotten the idea that it was okay for governments to extraordinarily render folks from other sovereign countries and kidnap them back home and hold them in secret and torture them? No one knows. Okay, sure. Lots of details in this one, and we'll have to digest it at a later date, but just wanted to put on the record. Yes, we know about it. Yes, we're going to have to talk about it. Yes, there'll be an awful lot more. Okay, let's see. Before closing things out here, other stories that may or may not require noting today. Let's see. I'm going to scroll through this here. Oh, that's an interesting one. Let's try closing out with this one. Oh, yeah, there is the discussion. Now I found where I parked it. I parked a tweet about the Rapid Intervention Group. All right, one more fun bit, just taking one more poke at Trump and his angry weekend before we close out, from Olivia Nuzzi in New York Magazine. Trump's phone friends may be more important than his staff. Who's he calling? Between this and his time in front of the telly this weekend, and as others put it on Twitter over the weekend, nothing could be more peak Trump than Trump getting angry that my programs is gone. What happened to my stories? Jeanine Pirro is over here. I don't know what's happening in the world. He's got access to like legit intelligence that everyone dreams of having, and he wants Jeanine Pirro to tell him what's going on in the world. But since she's not around, it's the phone. So here's the start of her story here. Shortly before news broke this month that Bill Shine would resign as the White House Communications Director and Deputy Chief of Staff, a person knowledgeable about his decision told me the former Fox News executive had come to understand the counterintuitive dynamic that defines many of Donald Trump's relationships. Proximity can be meaningless, as those who have his ear are often out of his sight. When you talk to him at night, you're going to have more impact than sitting in a room with 6 people, the person said, referencing the president's after-dark practice of calling and fielding calls from a vast network of informal advisors. Trump abides by what I call the Groucho Marx law of fraternization, meaning anyone choosing to be near him is suspect, while everyone else gets points simply for existing elsewhere. He always kind of wants what he doesn't completely have, the New York Times' Maggie Haberman once said. You are never more valuable to Donald Trump than when you're walking away from him. What explains this social idiosyncrasy? Obvious answers like self-loathing don't quite feel complete, but whatever the psychological cause, the effect is manifest in at least one thing: his compulsive phone habits. His Rolodex is a greatest hits and deep cuts composed of mostly friends, associates, media figures, and tycoons. Although Trump is known to call senior members of his staff at all hours, his informal advisors share a common attribute. They're not there, and therefore they can't be blamed when things are falling apart. Their praise sounds less sycophantic, and therefore more compelling. The president seems to grant the calls coming from outside the White House an inherent credibility. They are also a welcome distraction, a link to his old life in Trump Tower, when concepts such as executive time, a term used by aides to make it seem like the president is doing something productive when he's effing around and calling TV show hosts to gossip about ratings, a subject of intense interest for him even now, were relevant. Over the last 2 years, current and former officials from his campaign and White House, as well as friends and acquaintances, have provided information about Trump's Rolodex to New York. One source almost literally provided a Rolodex, sharing an internal document from the Trump Organization with contact information for 145 employees and 26 individual departments within Trump Tower. In the White House, a similar document exists. The switchboard operators maintain a list of cleared callers, a few dozen outsiders whose contact with the president was sanctioned by Trump's second chief of staff, John Kelly. The list includes Eric Trump, Don Jr., you would think they wouldn't need to be listed, Sean Hannity, Stephen Schwartzman, Rupert Murdoch, Tom Barrack, and Robert Kraft. Yeah, the massage guy. And then there are the unsanctioned callers. The outgoing contact from the Oval Office or the residence is unregulated, learned of only after the fact from the call logs kept by switchboard operators, while the calls to and from Trump's cell phone are unknown, a mystery to the official staffers who long ago abandoned any hope of controlling who the president speaks to when they're not around. And mostly, they're not around. Those who can't call the president directly often went through Hope Hicks. How does she do it? Trump's trusted communications director until she resigned last year. Often, information has come through Rona Graff, the longtime gatekeeper of Trump Tower, who has served as a channel for those seeking to quickly get a message to the president outside of official communications structures. Gee whiz, who would be interested in going outside of official communications structures? No one knows. All right, let's get the music rolling here and finish up our paragraph, at least to give you more flavor of it. As Roger Stone told the journalist Tara Palmieri in 2017, graft was the route for anyone who thinks the system in Washington will block their access. Others to endorse this plan, Gristidis' John Costamatidis. I have no idea what we're talking about in that one. All right. Well, the article goes on and on from there, but I just thought I'd give you a flavor of what's still continuing to happen inside the White House and how he's getting his information. If not from Jeanine Pirro, take her off the air, it doesn't matter. He'll call her on the phone and solicit her information that way. The guy has no interest in legitimate news, legitimate analysis of intelligence, nothing. He just wants to gossip. He's in way over his head. He's an idiot. Yes, you should absolutely impeach him, and we'll discuss that, I'm sure, more in, forever, until he's finally impeached. Tomorrow, Tuesday, special guest will have Ian Reifwitz with us. It's been a long absence, but he's got some new material to share with us and some new insights. We'll have him join us in the, I forget whether, I'll have to look it up, whether we'd agreed on the 9 o'clock hour or the 10 o'clock hour. But I will let you know, and I'll let myself know. But do join us tomorrow as he joins in and shares more of his fantastic insight with us.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Remember, by the way, the book he's currently promoting, Tribalization of Politics, How Rush Limbaugh's Race-Baiting Rhetoric on the Obama Presidency Paved the Way for Trump. And we'll be talking a little bit about this, white nationalism and white fear of demographic change, the Christchurch shootings, and all things related to it. Stay tuned now for Justice Next.